Millionaire is forced to marry for business, but ends up falling for his arranged bride. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The boardroom was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Under the bright glass lights, 32-year-old Ethan Ward, the youngest CEO in the history of Ward Group, sat perfectly still. His tailored charcoal suit could not hide the tension in his jaw. The men across the table, his late father's closest partners, were watching him closely, waiting for his answer. One of them finally spoke, his tone calm but sharp as a blade. "You know the terms of your father's will, Ethan. If you want to keep controlling shares, you must settle down. A marriage within 6 months." Ethan's pen stopped mid-signature. His gray eyes lifted slowly. "Marriage? You mean a merger?" The older man's lips twitched. "Call it what you will. Mr. Tran's daughter has agreed. It secures both families' interests." The words hit like a gavel. Ethan exhaled through his nose, scanning the glossy photo slid across the table. A young woman, mid-20s, dark hair, soft smile, Lila Tran, owner of a struggling flower shop, and daughter of Ward Group's most reliable supplier. She was a name on a contract, nothing more. "If this is what it takes to protect my company," he said coldly, "then fine, I will marry her." Cameras flashed as signatures were exchanged. The deal was sealed before he even saw her face in person. Later that night, standing alone in his penthouse overlooking the New York skyline, Ethan poured himself a glass of scotch. The city glittered like a promise he no longer believed in. He whispered to the empty room. A marriage of convenience. 6 months. No emotions. He almost convinced himself. Meanwhile, across town, Lila Tran locked up her small flower shop, her hands raw from arranging bouquets all day. Bills were stacked on the counter, and the landlord's notice peeked from under the register. When her father called, his voice was gentle but heavy. "Lila, you remember Mr. Ward's company saved us last year. They want to merge, through you." Her heart dropped. "Dad, that is insane. I cannot just marry a stranger." "It is just 6 months," he pleaded. "You will be safe, and our family business will survive." Lila stared at the faded sign outside the shop Tran's Blooms, her mother's dream before cancer took her away. Maybe this was the only way to save what was left. "Fine," she whispered, "but love has nothing to do with it." The next morning, at a private law office, Ethan and Lila met for the first time. No music, no flowers, just a contract and 2 signatures. Ethan's gaze was cool and unreadable. Lila's chin lifted in quiet defiance. The lawyer read aloud. Clause 1. No emotional attachment. Clause 2. No interference in each other's personal lives. Clause 3. Marriage to be annulled after 6 months. When the papers were signed, Ethan said, "We play our parts, nothing more." Lila met his eyes. "Fine, just do not forget rule number 3. As the pen clicked shut, 2 strangers sealed a deal that would change both their lives. Outside, rain began to fall, streaking the glass like ink on a forgotten promise. Inside, Ethan Ward told himself this was only business. But somewhere deep down, he felt the first crack in the armor he had built around his heart. The morning after the contract was signed, the city moved as if nothing had changed. But for Ethan Ward and Lila Tran, everything had. The tabloids had already picked up the headline, "Ward Group's young CEO marries florist's daughter in strategic alliance." Cameras followed them from the courthouse to the black car waiting outside. Ethan held the door open, expression unreadable. "After you," he said. Lila stepped in, clutching the hem of her simple ivory dress. The silence between them was as heavy as the gray sky above. The drive to his penthouse took 20 minutes, but it felt longer. Ethan's world was polished steel and glass. Hers was petals and earth. When they arrived, the elevator opened into a vast living space with cold marble floors and panoramic windows. Lila hesitated. "It looks like a museum," Ethan replied evenly. "That is the point. Order, no surprises." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess I am the first one." He did not answer. The staff gave polite bows before disappearing down the hall. Lila stood in the middle of the room, her reflection caught in the window's surface small, out of place but defiant. She placed her single suitcase beside the couch and unzipped it, pulling out a small pot of white lilies. Setting it on the dining table, she said softly, "Every house needs something alive." Ethan glanced at it, then at her, but said nothing. The following days unfolded like a quiet rehearsal. A stylist and etiquette coach arrived daily to prepare Lila for the role of Mrs. Ward. She learned which fork to use at business dinners, how to smile at photographers, and how to stand beside him without touching his arm. During one session, she tripped over her gown hem and stumbled straight into Ethan's chest. For a moment their eyes met hers wide with embarrassment, his surprised, almost amused. "If I can survive you stepping on my foot," he murmured, "I can survive the board." She laughed nervously, but that one fleeting smile stayed with him longer than it should have. That evening, he found her sitting on the balcony, sketching the skyline with a piece of charcoal on scrap paper. "You draw?" he asked. She nodded. "It helps me breathe. Flowers wilt. Paper remembers." He looked at her sketch, surprised by its precision and emotion. For the first time, he saw her not as a pawn but as a person. "They were wrong about you," he said quietly. "Who was wrong?" she asked. "Everyone." In the days that followed, Ethan began taking her along to corporate events. She made mistakes: a spilled drink, a name mispronounced, but each time her sincerity disarmed the room. People whispered less and began to smile at her. The gossip headlines softened. At one dinner, when a shareholder mocked her background, Lila lifted her glass calmly and said, "A florist knows how to grow things, even in harsh soil." The room went silent before applause broke out. Later that night, in the car, Ethan turned to her and said, "You handled that better than any lawyer I have ever met." She smiled at him for the first time without tension. Maybe flowers are better negotiators. He actually laughed, a sound he had not made in years. The ice around him began to crack. Still, when she thanked him for defending her at the table, he only said, "You did not need saving." One stormy night, the power flickered out across the city. Lila, wrapped in a blanket, lit a few candles from the kitchen. Ethan joined her on the couch, both listening to the rain against the glass. "When I was a kid," she said, "I thought rain was the Earth's way of starting over." He looked at her profile in the dim light. "And now?" "Now I think it is a reminder that even the strongest walls can still let sound through." The moment lingered. The thunder outside masked their silence. When the lights came back on, neither spoke of it. But something between them had shifted, subtle, fragile, undeniable. In the following week, gossip magazines called them the city's most unexpected match. But for the first time, Ethan did not care. He caught himself watching Lila arrange flowers in the penthouse, filling the cold space with color. One morning, he found a note she left by the lilies. "Even business deals can bloom if you water them." Ethan smiled, though he would never admit it aloud. For a man who built his life on logic, he was beginning to fear something far more unpredictable: the quiet pull of a woman who was never supposed to matter. Weeks passed, and the lines between duty and affection began to blur. Lila had become a familiar presence in Ethan Ward's sterile world, her laughter echoing softly through the penthouse that once knew only silence. Every morning she brewed coffee and left his cup by the window, always with a folded napkin beneath it, her handwriting neat and calm. "Have a good day, Mr. Ward." He pretended not to notice the notes, but every evening he found himself reading them again before tossing them away. One night, Ethan returned home late from a tense board meeting. The rain was falling hard, city lights bleeding across the glass. He saw Lila asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open on her lap. She had drawn the skyline again, but this time there was something different. Two figures standing by the window, holding hands. Ethan looked closer and realized one of them was him. Something inside him stirred, sharp and quiet. He covered her with a blanket and whispered, "Good night, Lila." The next morning, the warmth between them seemed almost natural. They shared quiet breakfasts, light teasing, and occasional laughter. Yet beneath it all, Ethan fought against the feeling creeping into his chest. This was supposed to be temporary. A contract. 6 months. No emotions. He reminded himself of it every night. But his heart had stopped listening. One afternoon, Ward Group hosted its annual charity gala. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, champagne, and polished ambition. Ethan walked in with Lila on his arm, her gown a soft shade of silver, simple yet radiant. Cameras flashed as they entered. She smiled, poised, graceful, the same woman the tabloids had once mocked. He could feel every eye on them, yet somehow he felt at peace. During the dinner, a wealthy investor leaned across the table, voice dripping with arrogance. "Mrs. Ward," he said, "you must be quite the lucky woman. Not every florist ends up owning half the skyline." The table chuckled politely. Lila met his gaze and said evenly, "You are right, sir. I am lucky. Not because of what my husband owns, but because he lets me be myself." The investor blinked, and the conversation died. Ethan's hand found hers under the table. "You handled that better than I would have," he whispered. She smiled softly. "Maybe flowers are better at surviving storms." Later that evening, after the music faded and guests left, Ethan and Lila stood alone on the ballroom balcony. The city stretched below them, endless and alive. "You looked beautiful tonight," he said quietly. She turned to him, her eyes bright under the city lights. "You almost sound like you mean it." "I do," he admitted, his voice lower now. A pause lingered, heavy with things unsaid. "Ethan," she whispered, "you do not have to pretend anymore." He frowned slightly. "Pretend what?" "That you are made of steel." He looked at her for a long time, and for the first time since they met, he did not have an answer. When they returned home, something unspoken hummed in the air. Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. They sat in silence for a moment before she said, "Do you ever wonder what happens after the 6 months?" He stiffened. "We annul it." That was the deal. "I know," she said softly, tracing the rim of her glass. "I just wonder if either of us will feel the same by then." The clock ticked in the background, loud in the stillness. He finally said, "I cannot afford feelings, Lila. They complicate everything." She met his eyes, her voice steady. "Maybe that is what makes them real." He looked away, but her words stayed with him long after she went to bed. That night, Ethan stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars trapped in glass. He remembered her smile at the gala, the way she had faced the crowd with quiet strength. Somewhere between their rehearsed smiles and polite conversations, something genuine had taken root. But for every step closer they grew, the shadow of their contract loomed larger. And Ethan knew, sooner or later, the truth about their arrangement would come crashing down, testing the fragile bond they were just beginning to believe in. As spring turned to early summer, the arrangement between Ethan Ward and Lila Tran had begun to look less like a contract and more like a life. They had found a rhythm, one that felt strangely real. Lila filled the penthouse with color and warmth, while Ethan, though still guarded, had started to smile more often. The city outside their window pulsed with life, but inside, their quiet routine became its own small world. Then came the night that changed everything. Ward Group was hosting an exclusive investor dinner, a high-stakes evening that could determine the company's future. Lila, in an elegant navy gown, stood beside Ethan as the cameras flashed. She had learned the rhythm of these events. Smile, shake hands, say little, stand tall. But that night, she noticed something in Ethan's expression: tension, fatigue, something more. During the event, one of the senior board members, a man named Richard Hale, approached with a drink in hand. "Ethan," he said, "I have been meaning to congratulate you on this marriage. Very strategic move." His tone dripped with mockery. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Richard, this is my wife. You might want to keep your compliments respectful." Hale smirked, glancing at Lila. "Oh, I did not mean offense. Just curious how long the show will last." Lila froze. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Hale chuckled. "Oh, come now. Everyone knows. 6 months, right? It is all over the emails. The contract, the clause, the end date. Surely you knew, Mrs. Ward." The words hit her like glass shattering. The room seemed to tilt. Ethan's face went pale. "Enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. But it was too late. Every whisper around the table had already started. Lila forced a small, trembling smile, then turned and walked out before anyone could see her tears. Outside, the city was a blur of neon and rain. Ethan caught up to her near the valet. "Lila, please, let me explain." She stopped but did not turn around. "Explain what, Ethan? That I was just part of your deal?" "It was before I knew you," he said desperately. "Before any of this was real." She faced him then, eyes shining with hurt. "Real? Which part was real? The part where you told me not to fall for you, or the part where you pretended you never would?" He stepped closer, rain soaking through his shirt. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," she said quietly. "And you cannot fix that with money or promises." She handed him the ring, the same one that had sealed their deal months ago. "You wanted a business arrangement, Mr. Ward. Now you have one less complication." She walked away into the rain, leaving him standing alone under the streetlights. That night, Ethan did not go home. He drove through the city for hours, the windshield wipers beating like a pulse. Every street reminded him of her, every corner, every light. At dawn, he returned to the penthouse. The pot of lilies still sat on the table, but the petals had started to wilt. The silence was unbearable. Days passed, and Lila did not return. The media had already exploded with headlines. Fake marriage scandal at Ward Group. Investors panicked. The board demanded Ethan's resignation. But for the first time in his life, he did not care about the company. All he could think of was the look in her eyes as she walked away. Across town, Lila moved back into her small apartment above the flower shop. She tried to bury herself in work, but every bouquet reminded her of him. Her father called, his voice filled with worry. "Sweetheart, he is on the news every night. He stood up for you, said it was not fake." "It does not matter," she said softly. "I cannot be with someone who sees love as a contract." One evening, she found a letter slipped under the shop door. It was from Ethan. The handwriting was precise, formal, but the words trembled. "Lila, I once built a life on logic. You taught me what it means to feel. I will not ask for forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life earning it." She read it twice, tears blurring the ink. She folded it carefully and placed it in her sketchbook. Outside, the lilies on her counter had begun to bloom again. Somewhere in the city, Ethan Ward made a choice that would change everything, a decision not for business, but for love. Weeks passed since the night Lila Tran walked away, and Ethan Ward's empire began to crumble without her. The boardroom that once echoed with his authority now felt suffocating. Rumors, scandal, betrayal, everything he had built was collapsing under the weight of lies he never meant to tell. When the board called an emergency meeting to discuss his removal as CEO, Ethan stood in front of them, shoulders squared but eyes tired. "Yes," he said simply. "Our marriage began as an arrangement. That is true, but what grew from it was not." He paused, scanning the room. "You built your companies on contracts. I built mine on people," and she reminded me that people matter more than signatures. The room fell silent. Richard Hale, the same man who had exposed him, smirked from the far end of the table. "You are a fool, Ethan. You let feelings ruin your power." Ethan met his gaze. "Maybe. But at least I still have something you never will honor." He placed his resignation letter on the table and walked out, ignoring the chaos that erupted behind him. The city outside was bathed in morning light, a new day breaking through the clouds. For the first time in years, Ethan felt free, though emptier than ever. Meanwhile, across town, Lila's flower shop had slowly come back to life. Customers returned, drawn by her warmth and quiet grace. She poured herself into her work, but every night when she closed the shop, she still caught herself looking at the door as if expecting him to appear. One evening, while arranging white lilies for a wedding, she turned the radio on. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Breaking news. Former Ward Group CEO Ethan Ward has voluntarily resigned, citing personal accountability and ethical restructuring. He has donated his shares to establish a new foundation supporting small family businesses. Lila froze. The vase in her hand trembled. The anchor continued. Sources say the foundation will be called the Bloom Initiative, named after his late wife's favorite flower. Her breath caught. Late wife? No. He was talking about her, the woman who had taught him how to live again. That night, unable to sleep, Lila took a walk through the quiet streets. The rain had just stopped, and the city glistened under the streetlights. As she passed the plaza near Ward Tower, she saw something that made her stop. The once cold lobby now displayed a sign. The Bloom Initiative, grand opening tomorrow. Beneath it, a wall-sized photograph showed rows of flower carts and market stalls, places that would now receive funding and support. And in the corner of the photo, a small inscription read, "For Lila, who taught me that love is the only deal worth keeping." Her eyes filled with tears. The next morning, Lila arrived at the opening ceremony, standing quietly at the back as reporters surrounded Ethan. He looked different, simpler, lighter. When the speeches ended, he stepped down from the podium, and their eyes met across the crowd. He hesitated, then walked toward her. "You came," he said softly. She nodded. "I had to see it for myself." "It is yours as much as it is mine," he said. "You inspired it." "Ethan," she whispered, "why did you do all this?" He looked at her, his voice steady. "Because I finally understood that love is not a contract. It is a choice, and I am choosing you." The crowd around them faded into silence as he reached into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled a small velvet box, not the sleek ring from months ago, but a simple gold band engraved with a single word. Bloom. He held it out to her. This time, no conditions, no rules, just us. Lila's hands trembled as she took the ring. "And what if I say no?" she asked gently. Ethan smiled faintly. "Then I will spend every day trying to make you change your mind." Her eyes softened, tears glimmering under the morning light. "You do not have to," she said, slipping the ring onto her finger. The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing, but for them, the world had gone still. Ethan pulled her into an embrace, whispering against her hair. "You were never part of a deal, Lila. You were the reason I became human again." Later that evening, they stood together inside the new foundation's garden, surrounded by hundreds of lilies in full bloom. Lila turned to him with a smile. "You see, Ethan? Even the coldest soil can grow something beautiful if you take care of it." He kissed her forehead gently. "Then let us keep growing together." And as the city lights shimmered in the distance, their story, once written in ink and signatures, began again written instead in love, forgiveness, and the promise of forever. Months later, the Bloom Initiative had become more than a foundation. It was a living symbol of change, a place where small businesses, community gardens, and local artists found hope again. Ethan Ward and Lila Tran worked side by side every day, building something not out of profit but purpose. They had left behind the marble walls and mirrored halls of Ward Group for open courtyards filled with laughter and the smell of flowers. Yet, even in their new peace, the world outside was not quick to forget. Some still whispered that Ethan's redemption was a calculated move, a publicity stunt. Lila would hear it sometimes in interviews or read it in online comments. One afternoon, she found Ethan standing by the large window of their office, staring at a new article on his tablet. The headline read, "Former CEO tries to buy back reputation." He did not speak, but the tension in his jaw said enough. She walked up quietly, slipping her hand into his. "Do not read those," she said softly. "Let them talk. They do not know who you are now." He looked at her with that familiar, thoughtful silence, then smiled faintly. "I just do not want my past to stain what we are building." "Then keep doing the work," she replied. "That is the only answer that matters." Her words settled over him like sunlight. Later that evening, they visited one of the foundation's newest projects, a small-town greenhouse that provided jobs for single mothers. The women greeted them with warm smiles, and one of them handed Lila a bouquet of lilies tied with a ribbon. "For you," she said, "because you gave us a new beginning." Lila's eyes shimmered as she thanked her. Ethan watched her kneel beside a child helping plant seeds, the sight hitting him with quiet wonder. He had once measured success in profit margins and quarterly reports. Now, he measured it in moments like this, in her laughter, in the way she made others feel seen. On the drive back, rain began to fall softly against the windshield. Lila rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The boardrooms, the control, the power?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "I thought that was what made me strong. But I was wrong. Power without heart is nothing." She smiled, tracing circles on the back of his hand. "Then maybe losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to you." "No," he said quietly. "Meeting you was." Her breath caught, and she turned toward him. For a moment, the hum of the road and the rhythm of the rain were the only sounds between them. Back home, they settled into a quiet evening routine. The penthouse had been replaced by a modest apartment near the foundation's office, a space filled with plants, sketches, and photos of their travels. One picture hung near the kitchen, the day of the Bloom Initiative's launch, with the words, "Love is the only deal worth keeping," engraved beneath it. While Ethan cooked, Lila set the table, humming softly. "Do you realize," she said playfully, "that you, the man who once had chefs on call, now burns toast every morning?" He laughed. "That is a small price to pay for freedom." They ate together, simple food but shared with real joy. Later, sitting on the balcony, Lila looked out at the skyline where Ward Tower still gleamed in the distance. "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked. Ethan followed her gaze. "No," he said after a pause. "That was a chapter I had to close so that this one could begin." She leaned against him. "I am glad you chose us instead." "I would choose you every time," he said, his arm tightening around her. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she smiled. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think love was fragile, like a flower that could die in the cold. But now I think it is more like the roots, quiet, unseen, but strong enough to hold everything together. Ethan looked at her, a small smile touching his lips. Then I guess we are still growing. The night breeze carried the scent of lilies from the garden below. It was the same flower that had once marked their first promise, their pain, and now their peace. As the world outside continued to spin, Ethan and Lila sat together in the quiet, proving that some stories do not need grand endings, only the simple truth that love, when chosen honestly, can turn even the coldest deal into something eternal. Autumn came quietly, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. The Bloom Initiative had grown beyond what Ethan Ward and Lila Tran ever imagined. Their small office now coordinated dozens of community projects across the country, each one a seed of kindness taking root. But with growth came pressure, and one afternoon, a letter arrived that threatened to undo everything. It was from Ward Group's legal division, an official notice demanding the return of several patents Ethan had signed over when he resigned. Without them, the foundation's funding would be crippled. Lila found Ethan staring at the document, his expression unreadable. "They want to destroy what we built," she said quietly. "It was only a matter of time," he replied. "Richard Hale will not stop until he wins." Lila stepped closer. "Then we fight back, not with anger, but with proof that what we are doing matters." That night, Ethan sat at his desk, drafting a statement for the media. He refused to let corruption take back what they had given away. The next morning, he held a press conference outside the foundation. Cameras clicked as he stood behind the podium, Lila beside him. "I am not here to defend myself," he began, his voice steady. "I am here to defend the people who believed in second chances. The Bloom Initiative is not a brand. It is a promise to every small business owner, every single parent, every worker who deserves hope. And that promise cannot be trademarked." The crowd erupted in applause, and the story spread across the nation. Letters of support poured in, from families, students, and even former employees of Ward Group who admired his courage. Within weeks, the company withdrew its lawsuit under public pressure. That night, as the foundation's staff celebrated, Ethan slipped out to the rooftop garden. Lila followed him, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You did it," she said, handing him one. "We did it," he corrected gently. They sat together beneath the string lights, the city glowing softly below. "You know," Lila said, smiling, "when we first met, you thought love was a liability." "I did," he admitted. "And now?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes warm. "Now I think it is the best investment I ever made." She laughed softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. The night breeze carried the faint scent of lilies from the garden beds around them. "Do you ever regret how it started?" she whispered. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "No, because if we had not signed that contract, I might never have found the courage to love for real." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Then maybe fate knew what it was doing after all. They sat there until the city lights dimmed and the stars took their place. Somewhere below, in the quiet hum of New York, the world kept moving. But for Ethan and Lila, time had slowed into something still. Something whole, a reminder that even the coldest deals can lead to the warmest hearts when love becomes the truest contract of all. Winter arrived with its quiet chill, wrapping the city in silver light. Inside the Bloom Initiative's main office, the fireplace crackled softly as Lila Tran organized donation reports. The foundation had become their shared heartbeat, and every day she felt prouder of what they had built. Ethan Ward entered, brushing snow from his coat, his expression thoughtful. "You have been working since dawn," he said gently. She smiled without looking up. "You taught me that success never sleeps," he chuckled. "Then maybe it is time to take a break." He placed a steaming cup of cocoa on her desk. She looked at it, then at him. "You remembered," she said softly. "You always drink this when you are overthinking," he replied. Their eyes met, the kind of look that said more than words ever could. The air between them carried years of trust, forgiveness, and the quiet understanding of 2 people who had walked through fire and chosen to stay. That evening, as the city lights glowed beneath the falling snow, Ethan asked her to join him for a walk. They stepped into the cold air, hand in hand, following the familiar path to the rooftop garden where everything had begun. The lilies were gone now, replaced by winter blossoms, tougher, smaller, yet still alive. "Do you remember the first night we stood here?" he asked. Lila nodded, smiling faintly. "You were pretending not to care about me." "And you were pretending not to notice," he said with a grin. She laughed, her breath forming little clouds in the cold. "We were such fools." "Maybe," he said, "but beautiful fools." They stopped by the railing, overlooking the city. Snowflakes landed on her hair like tiny diamonds. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "What is that?" she asked. "Something I wrote the day you left me," he said. "I never had the courage to give it to you." He handed it to her. Lila unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the words. "You said," she read softly, "if love was a risk, then you were willing to lose everything for it." She looked up, emotion thick in her voice. "Ethan," he took her hand, "and I meant every word, because love was never supposed to make sense. It was supposed to make us better." Tears welled in her eyes, glimmering in the snowlight. "You already did," she whispered. "You made me believe again." Ethan smiled, pulling her closer. "Then let me make you one more promise." From his coat, he produced a small velvet box. Inside lay a new ring, simple and elegant, engraved with the date of the Bloom Initiative's founding. "This time," he said softly, "there is no contract, no board, no witnesses, just you and me. Will you marry me again, for real this time?" Lila laughed through her tears. "Ethan, you never needed to ask." "I know," he said, slipping the ring onto her finger, "but I wanted to hear you say yes." She nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Snow continued to fall around them, soft and endless, as they kissed under the silver sky. Somewhere far below, the city carried on, unaware that two hearts had just begun again. Their story, once born out of obligation, had become something rare and true, a love rewritten not by fate but by choice. Spring returned 1 year later, bringing with it the scent of renewal and promise. The Bloom Initiative had grown into a nationwide network of hope, helping thousands of families rebuild their lives. On this bright morning, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of the new community center that Ethan Ward and Lila Tran had built in the heart of the city. The space was alive with music, laughter, and the colors of fresh flowers that lined every hallway. Lila walked among the guests, her long cream dress brushing against the petals scattered across the floor. She stopped by a display that featured photographs of their journey Ethan at the first press conference, children planting seeds, volunteers smiling beside their flower carts. Each picture was a piece of their shared history, proof that love could build something real out of the ashes of ambition. Ethan joined her, adjusting his tie with a small smile. "You did all this," she said softly. "No," he replied, "we did." They stood together as the crowd began to quiet. Ethan stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "A few years ago," he began, "I thought love was a distraction, something that weakened you. I was wrong. Love is what gives everything meaning. The Bloom Initiative was not built from money or power, it was built from forgiveness, from courage, and from one simple act of kindness that changed my life." He turned toward Lila, his eyes warm. "She taught me that love is not about what you have, but what you give." The audience erupted in applause, and Lila's eyes filled with tears. After the ceremony, as guests drifted away, Ethan led her outside to the garden behind the center. Rows of lilies and tulips stretched beneath the soft blue sky. In the middle stood a small fountain carved with the words, "Bloom where you are planted." Lila touched the inscription and smiled. "You remember everything," she said. "How could I forget?" he replied. "This was where it all began, a flower shop, a deal, and a woman who refused to stop believing in something better." She laughed quietly. "We were both so stubborn." "And thank God for that," he said, pulling her close. The breeze carried the scent of lilies through the air, mingling with her perfume, soft and familiar. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we never met?" she asked. Ethan looked at her, his expression tender. "Then I would still be the man who thought success could replace love. But now I know the truth. The real success is standing right here." She smiled, resting her head against his chest. The world felt still again, as if pausing to honor everything they had overcome. In the distance, children's laughter echoed from the playground. "You know," she whispered, "my mother used to say that true love grows like a garden. It takes patience, trust, and care." Ethan smiled. "Then I guess we are still gardening." She laughed softly. "Forever, I hope." He nodded. "Forever sounds good to me." As the afternoon sun dipped lower, they walked hand in hand through the field of lilies, each step marking the journey from contract to commitment, from silence to truth, from business to love. Their story had started as a deal, but ended as a promise that love, when chosen honestly, could outlast even the coldest winters. And as the last line of sunlight touched the garden, Ethan whispered, "This was the best mistake I ever made." Lila looked up at him, smiling through tears, and replied, "No, Ethan, it was fate, and we finally got it right."